Hello, it's Charles with Rock Ready UTV. Today we're going to be installing a set of our sway bar gussets on a 16 turbo RZR. These gussets also fit the RZR 1000. They'll fit all the RZR turbos and the Turbo S. Whenever you order them up, you can either get them in powder coated black, like shown here, or you can get them raw steel. That's up to you. And it comes with the hardware needed besides some of the stock hardware that you reuse. It should have 4 bolts in there, 4 nuts, 4 washers. Alright, the tools you need to install the sway bar gussets: you need a 13mm socket, a 15mm socket, a 15mm wrench, a 17mm socket, a 4 or a 6-inch extension, and you need a decent sized pry bar. The first thing you're going to do is remove the upper sway bar link bolt, which is this bolt. Now this one's unbolted just because we were also installing a set of trailing arms on here. It can be done with the lower one. We suggest doing the upper one. It's the sway bar gusset will slide over the sway bar way easier undoing the top one instead of the bottom one like it is right here. So you're going to undo this top bolt. After you undo the top bolt on both sides, you're going to take out these 2 nuts right here with your 13mm socket on both sides. After you get your sway bar link out and your 2 nuts off of the motor mount down bottom, you're going to use your 15mm socket to take out this motor mount bolt. Whenever you do it, it's good to have the pry bar underneath the motor mount tube and actually push up some so you take the weight off the threads that are on this bolt. That way you don't risk damaging the threads inside of this tube right here. You're only going to do this to one side of the RZR right now. So we're starting on the passenger side. Once you get that bolt out, you can actually take this motor mount all the way off for now. Next thing you're going to do to the same side that you took the motor mount off, you're going to use your 13mm socket and take out the 2 nuts that are on the carriage bolts holding the sway bar to the frame. Do this to only one side right now. After you get the nuts off, this is just a little reminder since some people don't know, there's a Zerk fitting on the back side of this frame mount right here, so you can actually grease your sway bar bushing. Most people don't know that, and the thing gets all dried, cracked, starts squeaking like crazy. So now would be a good time while you're doing all this work back here that you could actually grease it once this is back together. But now that this is unbolted, we're going to take our sway bar gusset and we're going to slide it up over, well, you all would have this bolt off, so you just slide it over the sway bar and get it into position here. Next, you're going to put these carriage bolts back through the frame. They're going to go through the bracket and through the sway bar mount, and then you're going to put the nuts back on there, but don't tighten them. All you got to do is just finger tighten them. You want to be able to have some play in this bracket for now. Alright, the next thing you're going to do is install the 2 bolts that I provided from the motor side of the frame. Through the hole. This front bolt is pretty easy to get to, and then so it'll be the bolt, and then make sure you put the washer nut on this side, and then this back bolt can be hard because the hose, kind of hard to see right there with the light, that hose can kind of get in the way. So what you may need to do is put leverage on there and pry up the motor just enough to get the hose out of the way until you can get the bolt through, and then you can let it back down. Don't tighten the bolts, just put them on there and hand tighten them. Alright, after you got those bottom bolts in there, you're going to move the motor mount back into position. You can see it sitting there. Make sure that the bolts go through the bottom along with the locator pins, and then it's seated fully down in there. And after that, you can put your 2 nuts back on there. Just don't tighten them all the way yet. Just run them up there some, but don't actually tighten them fully. In the next step, you're going to jump right back up here to your carriage bolts with nuts that you left finger tight, and you're going to go ahead and torque those back to factory spec. Now that your upper bolts for the sway bar are tightened down to the factory spec, you can insert this 10mm bolt back through the motor mount and into the motor mount tube. You're going to have to use your pry bar and lift up on the motor to align the hole, and that way you don't damage the threads whenever you put this back in. You can put this in and torque it back to the factory spec. Alright, now that your motor mount bolt's in, next you can tighten these two bolts with a 13mm socket. After that, you can tighten these two. You use a 15mm wrench on the back side on the bolt and a 17mm socket on the nuts. All the bolts should be tightened now, so you can jump over to the driver's side and follow the same steps. After you do that, then you can reconnect your sway bar mount, and they're done.